Thank you, CHAZAQ. Thank you, Yaniv. CHAZAQ does incredible work. I'm the biggest fan, and I appreciate the invitation very much. I also want to thank Torah Anytime for their absolutely wonderful work. Appreciate Torah Anytime very much as well. It was not an easy trip to get here. The rain was torrential. I'm coming from Brooklyn, and I said Tefillah Saderech with a lot of fervor and passion. Please make all blessings tonight, and the shiur is dedicated in memory of Ronit Bat Anna. There are thousands of people in Israel, in Eretz Yisrael, that had to cancel their travel plans. Now is a season of vacations. It's a season of having a good time. Thousands of people just today and yesterday had to cancel their plans because of the barrage of missiles that are coming from Hamas, from Gaza, from Egypt, raining upon Israel. The Jews in Brooklyn felt very ensconced and protected. They felt like they had a refuge. And so many Jews today no longer feel secure and safe. They feel that their children are vulnerable, at risk, after the horrendous, atrocious tragedy that befell us a few weeks ago. Sarah Hila Yaakov, it's a troubling, a very precarious time for the Jewish people. Dangerous time for the Jewish people. And I know that so many people, first and foremost, in their minds, in their hearts, they're asking, they're beseeching, they're imploring the Almighty, the Rebbeinu Shalom, when is Mashiach coming? And if you don't ask that question, there's something, they say in Yiddish, felt that something's missing. Just living in such atrocious times. How could you not ask? It's a very fundamental question, and I want to give a caveat tonight. I don't want to stir up any controversy. When is Mashiach coming? I'm not going to go ahead and prognosticate or predict a specific date that Mashiach is coming. That's only if you pay me $100. For that, I'll do it. I'm not going to take out my crystal ball here now that I do in my house. I tell my wife what's for supper. I'm not going to do that because Chazal were very against predicting the date for Mashiach's arrival, albeit the fact that Rabbi Sadiq and the Ramban, the Abarbanel, so many Rishonim went ahead in order to be mechazik, in order to go ahead and strengthen and encourage the Jewish people in times of sorrow, in times of trouble, and they did give dates. So I'm not going to give a specific date, but I'm going to talk in generalities, but you will not be disappointed. In the year 1996 of creation, not AD, of creation, from the inception of the universe, of the world, post-Adam, Adam Rishon, the year 1996, which was 340 years after the Mabul, the great deluge, the great flood that eradicated civilization. 340 is an interesting number. 340 is the gematria. Every Hebrew letter of the Aleph Beis has a numerical analog, a numerical equivalent. So 340 is gematria Shem. 340, Shin Mem, 340. Because the 340 years after the Mabul, the year 1996, the Mabul happened in the year 1656 of creation. The year 1996 of creation was a new era, a new dawn of civilization. A new book, a new chapter. 1996, 340, Shem, which is gematria Sefer, Samach Fei Reish. Samach is 60, Fei is 80, and Reish is 200. 60 plus 80 plus 200 is 340, because it was a new civilization. New opportunity, new hope, new era, a new epoch in life. It was 10 years before the demise, before the patira of Noach, Ish Sadik, the man who was rescued from the Mabul with his family. Just to give you a point of reference, the year 1996 of creation. Torah tells us that something very special happened in this year. Vayihi kol haaretz safa achas udvarim achadim. The world at large was united. Every single person was at peace with one another. There was a camaraderie. There was unison. There was brotherly love. It was unprecedented. Everybody spoke the same language. Everybody got along. Everybody was happy and healthy. This was a very propitious time. This was a very auspicious time. When everybody's getting along, when everybody's living in the same exact region, the same hub of society, speaking the same language, the most monumental, the most incredible things could have happened. And the most incredible things should have happened, because this was a time that was ripe for the giving of the Torah, which was the purpose of creation. The entire reason why the world was created was the fulfillment of God's promise to give a Torah to the people, to humanity. And this is when it should have happened, but it didn't. Instead, the people made a colossal error. A terrible, heinous mistake. An awful decision. What did they do that was so bad? What did they do? The Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Daf Kuf Zayin Amud Beis, page 107b says, Dor HaFlaga, that's the generation of this year 1996, called the generation of the dispersal. That's this generation. Ein lahom chelek le'olam haba. They will never return for the world to come. They are punished eternally. What did they do that was so bad? The Gemara actually asked my question. The Gemara on the next page on Daf Kuf Ches says, My Avud. What did they do? I mean, they had to do something terrible. They had to do something abysmal. They had to do something that was so egregious and so sinful and so horrible that they lost Olam Haba. I'll tell you what happened. See, the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah, Daf Tes, Gemara says that there are 6,000 years to our universe. Our world as we know it will exist for 6,000 years. The first 2,000 years, it says, are years of desolation, of chaos. The second 2,000 years means that the year 2000 forward, the year 2000 from creation, starts the era of Torah. And that's when the Torah should have been given. 1996 is at the brink of the year 2000. I remember Y2K when we had it 11 years ago. And I don't know if you know this, but I hope you didn't do this. We went ahead and we stocked up on all different types of groceries and water, and we were hiding in the basement. We dug a tunnel, and it was just like I was in this spacesuit. You should have seen me. No, I'm just. The year 2000 from creation was supposed to be the dawn of Torah, but it didn't happen. What did people do instead? So, Medrash says that what they did was Devarim Achadim. Right? Remember, the pasuk said, this is the key words here. Vayhi kol oretz safa achas udvarim achadim. Says the Medrash, what does safa achas mean? One language, beautiful. Harmony, ecumenicism, beautiful. Oh, everybody's getting along. Dvarim achadim. What is Dvarim achadim? Says the Medrash. You know what Dvarim achadim means? Dvarim achadim comes to the word chad. Chet, daled, ches, daled, which means sharp, piercing, which means confrontational, dispute. It means fighting, waging war. Because what did these people do that should have capitalized, that should have exploited the moment of harmony and peace and brought the Torah? What did they do instead? They said, you know what? We're going to go to war against God. These people weren't atheists. They were worse. They were heretics of the greatest order. What was their calculation? They said, you know, we're afraid there'll be another flood, another deluge. I was thinking that tonight on my way here. I was like, no. Thank God, God promised He would never do that again. All right? Never do that again. So that was my only reassurance tonight. But they didn't believe in that. They didn't believe in the covenant of peace that there will never be a flood again. So what they say? They said, oh, every 1,656 years there's going to be another flood. We're going to go ahead and we're going to fortify ourselves. We're going to go ahead and solidify the heavens. We're going to seal the heavens. You know, take some Elmer's super glue. I mean, I didn't know what you're dealing with here. It's almost like preposterous and nonsensical, but this is what the people thought. They're going to build a ladder, and they built this huge tower, and they're going to go to war against God. It's like WWF, World Wrestling Federation. Hey, God, come here. Or boxing, put on my gloves, I'm going to go to war against God. That's what the people did. Devarim achadim. There was one man of all the denizens of all the people in that year, 1996. I don't know how many millions of people there were. There was one individual, and all it takes is one. There was one man who got up. He was an insurgent. And he said, no, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to allow this. We're going to defend the Almighty. We're going to defend the Master of the Universe, Rabbanu Shalom. What was his name? His name was Avraham. Avraham Avinu was born in 1948. Since creation, 1996 of creation, this man, Avraham, was 48 years old. 48 years old. When did he become religious? We know he was born to a pagan family. They were idolatrous. So it's interesting. There's a chilukei deos. There's different opinions. One opinion says, Medrash brings down, and the Gemara actually subscribes to this. One opinion is that he was 3 years old. And actually, this past week's Torah reading, Akev, is an allusion to this because it's V'haya Akev Tishma'un. Some say it's an allusion. It's a remez, a hint to Avraham. Because Avraham was religious for 172 years of his life. Remember, he lived 175 years. So if he became religious when he was 3 years old, then he lived 172 years of Akev Tishma'un, of listening to God's commandments. Others say no. 3 years old is when he had the cognizance, the awareness. And I've met 3 years old that are very precocious, that are very astute, that have good aptitude. Don't laugh if you think a 3-year-old is going to know God. Yeah. When my twins are born, my son, who was very young, his first question was, why didn't Hashem give us any boys? Kids ask great questions. Kids have an aptitude. Kids have an intelligence that you can't underestimate. So, 3 years old, he becomes religious. Says the Rambam, in Hilchos Mada, in the Laws of Knowledge, that Avraham Avinu became religious at the age of 40 years old. Others say that it's a printer's error, and it should have said 48, because it's based on a Medrash, and the Medrash says 48 years old. So that means that it took 45 years. 48 was the culmination. For 45 years, he was plugging away from the age of 3 years old to decipher, to plumb the depths, of intelligence, of knowledge, to decipher the oneness of God. Interestingly enough, the Torah, and I read it, very recent. What does it say? Ma Hashem Sholmi. What does God ask of you? Ma is 2 letters, Mem Hey. Mem Hey is gematria, numerical equivalent of 45. It took 45 years of shoel, of inquiring, of investigating, of an inquisitive mind to figure out, to culminate in the final fulfillment of the realization of the Almighty from Avraham Avinu. 48 years old. 48 is Moach, Memches, Moach, the brain. Because that's when Avram's brain served a purpose, to really understand Hashem. And that's when he stood up against the entire civilized world, and he said, no. You're not waging war against the Almighty. To the extent that the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer in chapter 24 says that Avraham Avinu publicly went ahead and explicitly cursed everybody. And he said, Bala Hashem should destroy. And he said, Palag Lishonam, he should split their tongue. He should take their unity and fragment it. He should take their cohesiveness and discombobulate it. Pasuk in Tehillim, chapter 55, Pasuk Yud, Bala Hashem, Palag Lishonam, comes from Avraham Avinu, when he cursed the Dor HaFlaga, this generation of 1996. Because they had the temerity, they had the audacity, they had the gall and the brazenness to go ahead and to try to wage war, Devarim Achadim, against God. And then ultimately, says the Medrash, they waged war against Avram Avinu. It was a one-man battle against the entire world. Millions of people, and they said him, because he was 48 years old already, it seems that that generation, the people were fathering children already by 30 years old. And they said, look, he hasn't had a kid yet. He's just an impotent mule. That's what they called him. And they said, if you're so religious, then what's the point of all your religion if you can't pass it on to your children? And they chastised him and berated him and maligned him. So it says in Medrash, that's what happened in that generation. But the Medrash brings out another interpretation. Medrash says, now what does it mean, Devarim Achadim? What happened in that generation? Achadim means closed, locked, mysterious. Enigma, confounding, something we will never know. What's that about? What's that about? So the Medrash says that the Dor HaMabul, the generation of the flood, we know what they did. They did something very pernicious. They were perverted. They did very, very vulgar type of sins, obscene sins. We know exactly why God sent the flood and destroyed Las Vegas. We know why he did it. But the Medrash says when it came to this generation, the generation 1996, it doesn't tell us, the Torah, why. It doesn't say what their sin was. It says that they wanted to build a tower. So, no, what's wrong with building a tower? Something bad with building a tower? Happens every day in Manhattan. Skyscrapers. In Dubai, they're trying to build. In Japan, they're trying to build the largest tower in the world. What's so bad? So the Medrash says that the Torah, that God, for some reason, concealed what the real sin was. It doesn't tell you that they were waging war against God. It doesn't tell you they had this whole battle with Abraham. Why not? Why doesn't it say it? Why conceal it? The Torah is very graphic usually. Sometimes it's so graphic you have to wow, Torah is very explicit. It goes through everything. So why not tell us what their sin was? So it says the Be'er Sheva on the Gemara and the Talmud. He gives two reasons. His first reason is that the only reason why the Torah always gets so graphic and delineates and explicates and graphically depicts what happened, what the sin was, is that we should stay away, that we should learn from it. But in this instance, it will never happen again, he says, that the universe, that society is all united. It will never happen again. It's not something that will be duplicated or replicated. People hate each other, Nobody's going to get together again like that. So there's no point in illustrating. His second reason, he says, is that it would be a chilul Hashem. It would be a desecration of God's name to go ahead and to write the fact that there were actually people so close to creation, only 1996, 1,996 years, only 340 years after the Mabul, that would have the guts, or the chutzpah, the audacity, to try to wage war against God. It's too much for chilul Hashem. Therefore, God doesn't write it. But comes along the Radal, Rabbi David Luria, famous commentary on the Medrash, and he says something that is astounding, that will blow you off your seats. All right? Fasten your seatbelts quickly. You know what he says? He says the reason why this may be the only time that Hashem conceals, leaves it a mystery, what this generation, and obviously they did something very, very, very bad, that they lost all of Haba. So why does God cover it up? He says there's one reason. This is the reason he says. Suspense and drama. This is monumental what he says. This is going to change your life forever. You're not going to walk out the same person. And if you do, oh boy. You know what he says? He says, because the people in this instance were unified. They loved each other. I'll give you the exact language of the Medrash. It says, Al yidei shahayu ohavim ze lezeh, nishtayru mehem pleita. Because they loved one another, they all survived, unlike the Mabul. You know, Rashi asks a very, very critical question. Rashi says, Ezu kasha, which one was more severe? Which sin was worse? The sin of the Mabul or the sin of these people that waged war against God? He says the sin of the Mabul, they didn't doubt God. They did sins. They did very, very bad sins. But they didn't doubt God. He says, but the Dora Flaga, they went. A confrontation against God. He says, that's much worse. He says, so how come the Dora Mabul was decimated and eradicated and annihilated off the face of the earth, and the Dora Flaga survived? And Rashi says something very beautiful. Same thing as in Medrash. Is because the Dora Mabul, they stole from one another. There was no unity. They didn't get along with each other. They disobeyed each other. They disrespected each other's property, each other's value. But the Dora Flaga, they respected each other. They loved each other. And that's why they survived. The strength of peace. Says Rabbi David Luria that the reason why God chose not to explicate the sin of this generation of 1996 was because since they loved and respected one another, they had such a schus, such a merit, that Hashem decided to cover up the sin. Which maybe, I don't know if this is so, but there's a pasuk, there's a verse in Mishlei, chapter 10, verse 12. Al kol pishaim techasa ahava. For all sins, love covers it up. If you really love somebody, if you're in love with your spouse, if you're in love with your child, and they go ahead and they smash up your car, love, you know, covers it up. Hashem says, when I see love between people, I'm not going to tell you what the sin is. That's big, beautiful. But what bothers me is a comment by the Eitz Yosef, who's a commentator on the Medrash, and he says that when it talks about this generation 1996, it says Devarim Achadim. He says that really this is deep. This is futuristic. This is shrouded in tremendous mystery. There's a tremendous, very deep secret and lesson over here. And I want to discover what that mystery and lesson is, and what that has to do with Mashiach, what that has to do with our generation, what that has to do with you and I sitting here tonight. So join me on this journey. We mentioned earlier the Gemara in Avodah Zarah that says on page Tes that the world will exist for 6,000 years. There's a corollary Gemara to that. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Sadik Zion says, Amar Rabbi Katina. Rabbi Katina says, Shis Alfei Shana Abi Alma, that the world will exist for 6,000 years, and then the world changes forever and ever. The world is altered to a universe that we have no comprehension of. The fabric is totally, totally distorted. It's a new reality that we will never conceive today. So that means, says Rabbi Katina, this is what the Gemara darshans on, this is the Gemara expands upon, that Mashiach must come before the year 6,000. No ifs, ands, or buts. Now, we are at the brink. We are at the helm of Rosh Hashanah. It's basically just a few weeks away. I don't want to scare you a few weeks. You know, Rosh Hashanah is Judgment Day. So we'll say, like, you know, it's a few months away, right? That is the harbinger for the year 5,772. Which means that we are 228 years away from the year 6,000. You hear what I'm saying? According to most Rishonim, the era of Mashiach must last several generations. Mashiach is broken up into different tekufos, different phases. You have the coming of the Mashiach, the building of the base of Mikdash, you have Tchias HaMeis, resurrection of the dead. You got a lot going on. That's got to happen in a fold. It can't happen in 1 year, 2 years. It's got to occur. It's got to happen. So if we're only 228 years away, where is Mashiach already? You know what that means? It means that every day that goes by that Mashiach didn't come. It means we're wasting time from the entire Tkufa, era of Mashiach. Says the Pasuk of Micha, chapter 7, verse 15. Ki mei seitzcha me'eretz Mitzrayim erenu nifla'os. Just as was the exodus from Egypt, you will be redeemed in the end of days, before the year 6000. I will show you then too nifla'os, wonders. Which means that our redemption today, Mashiach coming, is predicated upon the exodus from Egypt over 3,300 years ago. And Rabbi Dosa, in the Gemara, Rabbi Dosa says that the Bris Bein Absarim of Avraham Avinu, the treaty, the covenant of parts, where Avraham Avinu was told that the Jews would be afflicted, the Jews would be subjugated by the Egyptians for 400 years. They would be exiled. Says Rabbi Dosa, and the Yalkut Shimoni actually goes ahead and applies the verse of Micha of the correlation between the exodus from Egypt and our redemption today to this Gemara, Rabbi Dosa. That the same way there were 400 years of affliction, there were 400 years of subjugation, there were 400 years of tyranny, and there were 400 years of persecution and terror and torture for the Jewish people in the exile of Egypt. There will be 400 years of Mashiach before the year 6000. Says the Maharsha that the years, 400 years of affliction will turn into 400 years of joy. The same number, 400. Which means that Mashiach time begins in the year 5,600. Because that's 400 years before the year 6000. Which was equivalent to the secular year of 1839, 1840. That's when Mashiach time starts. The Rambam in Hilchos Melachim says, Maimonides says, something very fascinating. He says the Mashiach is not going to be something that is just poof, magic. It's going to be a progression of natural science, natural events. So when the Navi tells us that people will have unprecedented longevity, almost immortality, according to the Rambam, seemingly it means that they'll discover genes. The Human Genome Project will discover genes that will allow us to live. Perhaps. What was the year 5,600? What was the year 1839, 1840? It was the year of the scientific and industrial revolution, really. The Industrial Revolution, which was a harbinger, which was the progenitor, basically, of all knowledge. Which is very fascinating because the Zohar, Parshas Vayera, says that in the year 600 of the 6th millennium, which is the year 5,600, a tremendous amount of wisdom will come down to the world, which will, according to the Mefarshim in the Zohar, serve as, guess what? The energy and the forerunner for Mashiach. Because people have to awaken. Something also very interesting is the fact that we know that in Sefer Daniel, and this is brought down in the Zohar many times, in Pirkei Rebbe Lezer many times, in many, many sources in Torah, that the final persecutors of the Jewish people will be the Arabs. The Arabs for hundreds and hundreds of years, they lay dormant. The Christians were the ones that were terrorizing us with their pogroms and their crusades. The Arabs had their fair share, don't get me wrong. But then they were basically vanquished by the Christians. But suddenly, in 1840, the Saudis, basically, Wahhabism takes over Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. And it's the start of a whole new dawn of Pan-Arabism. Fascinating. Just the time, which is the foreigner for Mashiach. Says the Zohar In Parshas Toldos, Kuf Pei 180, in the Medrash Ne'elam, he says, you want to know when Tchias HaMesim is going to happen? You want to know when resurrection of the dead is going to happen? And this is accorded, and maybe our reading is wrong. So 18 years from now, don't shoot me. Don't say, ooh, I'm going to wait 18 years to prove him wrong. I don't know. Maybe it's read wrong. Maybe it's not the right interpretation. Maybe it means only if we're worthy. I don't know. But says the Zohar that Mashiach the Tchias HaMesim will happen 210 years before the year 6000, which is very interesting. Because we just mentioned that the Mashiach era begins in the year 5600. 190 years after that is the year 5790. 190 years. What is in 190 years? What does that remind you of? How many years were the Jews supposed to be in Egypt? 400 years? They were supposed to be tortured there, enslaved, persecuted. How many years in reality were they there? Only 210. So it was an expedited, facilitated type of redemption where they got out how many years early? What's 400 minus 210? 190. Kates, Kuf Tzadik, the end of all the troubles. So 190 years, you see the Kimei Tzeitzcha, like Micha Hanavi said. Kimei Tzeitzcha Me'eretz Mitzrayim Me'eretz the flows, just like I took you out of Egypt in the end. There's the Psik that Rabbi also says this. When it comes to the end of days before the year 6000, the same numbers will be in play. The year 400, the year 190, the year 210. So 210 years before the year 6000, which was 190 years after the year 5600, what's going to happen? Tchias HaMesim. Now, what does Tchias HaMesim mean? There's a Shalosh Tshuvas Radvaz, there's a Rebbe Chanan Wasserman on this. Many, many different shitas of who will be resurrected first. Many say Moshe and Aaron will be resurrected first. Others say the Yechidei Skula, the great people from every generation who awaited the coming of Mashiach. But that's, you know when that is? The year 5790 is 18 years from now. Are you ready? You ready to see your grandparents? I know one guy told me, my mother-in-law, 18 years from now. Says the Zohar, 139 in Toldos. That 40 years before Tchias HaMesim will be the Kibbutz Golios. That's another prerequisite. Another initial step before Mashiach is Kibbutz Golios, some say. Some say Mashiach will make it occur. Kibbutz Golios is the ingathering of the exiles, where people that are dispersed on the four corners of the earth will start coming, pilgrimage to Eretz Yisrael, to reside there. 40 years before 5790 is 5750, 5750, which is equivalent to the year 1990. 1990? Gee, what happened in the year 1990? I remember 1990 very well. You know what happened then? All of a sudden, Glasnost, the Soviet Union, the Soviet animal, the Iron Curtain was knocked aside. The Jews started coming out of Russia. Operation Exodus. Thousands upon thousands, hundreds of that maybe, I don't know how many. Innumerable amounts of Jews were able to now ascend to Israel, Kibbutz Golios. Amazing. So it seems ironclad, it seems patently clear that this is Mashiach. He could come now any second, any day. But the Beis Yosef in Orach Chaim, Kuf Pei 180 says that Mashiach, for him to come, we got to demand him to come. We got to say, I want you. You know, all the chutzpah that you ever had to your mother, your teacher, your father, whoever it is, this is what you got to use now for positive. You got to say to Hashem, I want Mashiach. I'm not going to accept anything. I want. You know, there's a halacha that says that if you hire somebody, a day laborer, you hire somebody to do your wallpaper, to paint your house, whatever it is. Schar Sochir. You hire somebody, Schir Yom. You have to pay him. You're not allowed to let the sun set or sunrise, depending upon the situation. He has to get paid. But the halacha is, says the Chofetz Chaim, that if he doesn't demand, if he doesn't ask for his payment, then you're not over. You don't transgress a sin. Says the Chofetz Chaim, it's the same thing here. Hashem knows we want Mashiach. Hashem knows we need Mashiach. But if we don't demand our payment for doing all the good that we're doing, it's not going to come. We're not going to get it. It's not going to happen. We need to demand. I just saw a story today from Torah Tavlin, a beautiful story about a kid who was rebelling against his father's lifestyle, his parents' lifestyle, the religious community. And he said, I'm giving everything up, Rahman al-Islam. And he went into the army, in the Israel army, and for 3 years he was in the Israeli army. He did not keep one mitzvah. He got out of the army, he tells his father, he says, now I have to experience liberation. I have to experience freedom. I'm going to travel the world. Give me some money. His father said, I'm asking one thing from you. I'm asking you, wherever you go, wherever you travel, just put on tefillin every day. Put on tefillin. He says, yeah, I'll do it. It took him 2 weeks to call his parents. He was living it up, probably going to the Far East, the Near East, wherever he was. 2 weeks he calls his parents, and his father says, no, did you put on tefillin? Yeah. He says, you did it every day? Yeah, I put on tefillin. Next time he speaks to his father says, do you wear the tefillin? Of course I did. I've been doing it every single day since you taught. I've been doing it every single day. Speaks to his father again. Did you put on tefillin? Yeah, I put on tefillin. Well, the money starts getting dry. The mullah, the flus, starts getting dry. And the kid, he wants to experience everything. He wants to go, he's a globetrotter. He wants to go the whole world, see everything. And he's out of money. So what do? Calls his father. And his father says, did you put on tefillin? He says, who cares about tefillin right now? I need money. He says, did you put on tefillin? He says, yeah, I put on the tefillin. I need money. So the father says, I'm sorry. Now he's really, really desperate. And a week later, he really has nothing. Calls his father, begging, pleading. His father says, did you put on tefillin? Will you stop that tefillin nonsense already? I need money. I'm not going to survive here. Did you put on tefillin? Ah, stop. Kid goes ahead and he has to come back home to Israel because he has no money left. He's totally dry on money. His father picks him up to the airport, and the kid doesn't talk to his father. He ignores him totally. His father refused to give him the money, right? Goes back home. And the father says, I see you're ignoring me. He says, I just want to ask you a question. He says, did you put on tefillin? And he says, stop it already. He says, well, one thing. Could you give me your tefillin? Give me the bag, the tefillin bag. The kid hands it to him. And the father, in front of the son, he opens up the tefillin bag, and it's $5,000 cash in there. He says, how'd you just put on the tefillin? How'd you just put on tefillin? The kid, for the rest of his life, went to Minyan and put on tefillin every single day. Hashem says to us, each and every day, Tzipisa Yeshua. He wants us to yearn for Mashiach. He wants us to demand Mashiach. He says, did you ask for Mashiach today? And we say, leave me alone, leave me alone. If we'd only ask, we'd get the jewels. We'd have everything. If we'd only follow His commandments and try to have brotherly love, we'd get everything. But you know what? We could demand Him, but we have to deserve Him. So how do we deserve Him? So there was a very famous rabbi, one of the great teachers of the Jewish people, one of the greatest, known as the Mabit. His name was Rabbi Moshe Trani. Moshe Trani lived in Sfas. He was a Talmud, a student of Mari Beirav, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, and a colleague of the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yossi Karo. As a matter of fact, he succeeded Rabbi Yossi Karo as the chief rabbi of Sfas. If I'm not mistaken, he was also a contemporary of Rabbi Shlomo Alkabitz and Arizal, talking about somebody very, very, very great, inestimably great. So one of the best things he was known for, he was renowned for, the Mabit, was for the fact that he wrote the Beis Elokim, which was a hashkafa book. I love hashkafa books because I wrote one, right? I'm very prejudiced. But I wrote one for a generation where everybody's going off Nebuch. And a lot of people coming back. But all they do is they go on the internet and they get all confused. Or they go on the street and they get the wrong things. So I wrote a hashkafa book for the generation that has questions, that doesn't have any answers. He wrote a hashkafa book in a generation where you had a Rabbi Yosef Karo. But he said, people need proofs. And the Beis Elokim is all about Ikrei Hadas. Proving the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit. So in his Shar Yesodos, chapter 51, Parak Nun Aleph, he goes ahead and he wants to prove that Mashiach is going to come. He says it's a hard task. He said, because to bring a raya min achush, he wants to bring empirical evidence. He wants to bring scientific sort of evidence that Mashiach is going to come. He says, but Mashiach, then he says, no. He said, Mashiach did come once. There is historical precedence. Look at Egypt, Mitzrayim. But he says, look at Mitzrayim. This is very fascinating what he says. He wants to bring proof for the fact that Mashiach is going to come. Says the Mabit that in the time of Mitzrayim, the Jews were not religious. The Jews never believed that there would be a redemption. They thought they were stuck forever and ever in the quicksand of Egypt. And the pakod pakadati that Yosef HaTzadik left behind, that he bequeathed to the people, that you will be remembered, you will be redeemed from here. Only Yechidei school, only very, very few select people acknowledged that and knew it. The rest of the people, though, he says, forget about it. They didn't believe. Hopeless. He says, and that's why Hashem had to make miracles like he never made before. The splitting of the sea, the 10 plagues. He said, because he had to wake them up from a slumber. They never did tshuva, according to the Mabit. This is very fascinating. I never knew this before I saw this Mabit. He holds that the Jews in Egypt never did tshuva. It says by Yitzchak that they cried out in pain. But it never says by Yitzchak el Hashem. It says Vatal Shavasam el Hashem. That their cries went up to God, but not that they went ahead and cried to God. He says they never did tshuva. In contrast that with the miracle of Purim, where Iran was going to destroy every Jewish person. And the Gemara Megillah, Daf Yudala, tells us that what 48 prophets couldn't do, Haman, Hitler, was able to do by scaring us. Because all of a sudden we're united. Look at what happened to that boy, Levi Kletsky. Hashem Yinakim Damo. Allah Shalom. Everybody united. Why? Because when you get a hit, when you feel scared, all of a sudden, people that are enemies become best of friends. People that have nothing to do with each other become best of friends. And that's what happened in the time of Purim. So Hashem did not have to make any real miracles. But in Mitzrayim, the Jews never did tshuva. They needed a wake up. They needed a reality check. They needed a wow factor. Therefore Hashem had to send tremendous amounts of miracles to Egypt. He says this could be the same thing in our time. This is because although we'll be religious, there'll be a lot of religious Jews, he says. And there are, Baruch Hashem, amazing. Brooklyn, Queens, Harlem, right? There are a lot of great Jewish communities out there. Just want to see how many of you are still up. Beautiful. But he says, you know what? We are going to be so despondent. We are going to be so cynical. Because we're going to say, 1 second, how do we know this will be it? This will be the real Geula. This is the real Mashiach. Maybe it's another fake. Maybe, God forbid, there will still be another Holocaust someday. How do we know it's real? Therefore, says the Mabit, Hashem is going to have to send miracles, unlike he did in Mitzrayim, in Purim, like he did by Mitzrayim. Not only that, but the pasuk in Yirmiyah, chapter 16, verse 14 says, Chai Hashem, by the life of Hashem, the miracles that he did for Mitzrayim, we will no longer say that the God who took the Jews out of the land of Egypt. We will say the God who took the Jews out of Brooklyn, New York, or Queens, New York. That's what it says. All right, it says a little different. It says from the northern country. Because the Mashiach, the Geula Asida, our redemption, which is coming very, very, very soon, imminently, will outshadow and eclipse everything from Mitzrayim. It will be so great. Why? To prove to us that this is it. This is the final one. But the Mabit says that's not enough. That's not enough. Something else will happen. What will happen, he says? And he brings a pasuk from Tzefanya. Tzefanya was an amazing Navi. Tzefanya was a Navi that people think, it's a joke. There was a Navi Tzefanya? Yeah, it was a Navi Tzefanya. It was one of the greatest Nevi'im. Tzefanya means Hashem's hidden. It means in that book. It's only 3 chapters long. If you want to do something good, just read it. And you say, I finished the whole book of the Navi. Wow. Everybody said, wow. So how long was it? 3 chapters. 53 psukim, that's it. 53 psukim. But those 53 psukim, according to many Mefarshim, are the deepest. Because 23 times in those 53 psukim does it mention Yom Hashem, Yom Adin, the final day. And the pasuk says in Tzefanya, Parak Gimel, pasuk Tesh, chapter 3, verse 9, it says, Az efoch. El ha'amim safa brura. Then I will go ahead and convert all the people. They will all talk the same language. 1 second. That sounds so familiar, doesn't it? Doesn't it sound familiar? Doesn't it sound like the year 1996? Isn't it eerie? Az efoch el ha'amim safa brura. Likro kulam b'shem Hashem. They will all be united. There will be brotherly love. They'll all speak the same common language. Whoa, what happened? Says the Mabit that in order to prove to us that this is the Geula, Hashem will miraculously make it that every single Gentile, every person in the world, even our biggest enemies, will go ahead and subscribe to the same language, speak the same tongue, all call in the name of Hashem, all want to be Jewish. That's what's going to happen. He says the reason for this is, he says, because the whole entire purpose of the creation of the world was only that the Torah should be given to all of humanity. Adam Harishon, primordial man, Adam HaKadmon was supposed to receive the Torah. He messed up. Noah should have received. He messed up. The year 1996, they were supposed to receive the Torah. They messed up. Really, all of humanity is supposed to receive the Torah. There were 26 generations until Moshe Rabbeinu. And those 26 generations, Hashem had to go ahead and exert tremendous chesed. If you look at the great Hallel HaGadol, the Hodul Hashems, there are 26 Kila Olam Chazdo. It's only on the account of His kindness. Because there are 26 generations, Hashem should not have had a world, but He allowed the world to exist nevertheless out of kindness. And once the Torah was given, the only reason why the world existed was on the account of the Jewish people. Baruch she'amar v'haya olam. Blessed is the one that spoke, God, and there's a world. My grandfather said a beautiful thing. He said the she'amar is the gematria of Yisrael. Baruch Yisrael haya. The only reason why there's a world is because they're Jewish people, because there's a Torah. That's it. So the people in our generation, the entire world, will go ahead and receive the Torah. Amazing. They'll all speak the common language. They'll all be unified and united. Az efoch el ha'amim safa brura. But comes along Rabbi Yitzchok in his book, Machshavas Charutz, Rabbi Yitzchok HaKohen from Lublin, who lived hundreds of years ago. And he says that in that year 1996, when the people of the world all united, he said really what was supposed to happen is they were supposed to unite for good, for God, but there always has to be a darkness before the light. That's Kabbalistic. He says, so therefore, before Avram Avinu was able to go out and unleash the spirituality, the wisdom of God in the world, there had to be that Dor HaFlaga. There had to be that generation that united against God in order for people to unite for God. Which means that whole account in 1996 happened for one reason. Maybe this is what the Eitz Yosef on the Medrash said when he said that Devar Machadim means that this account of 1996 is futuristic, it's secret, because it is a template for Mashiach, for our generation in 2011, in the year 5771, 772. Why? Because that generation, they were against God, but God let them live for one reason alone, because they loved each other, you respect each other, you united. How much more so, says the Medrash Tanchuma, about us. It says that the Jewish people, it says, they could be the greatest sinners. They could worship Avodah Zarah. But if they were just to unite with each other, then you know what will happen? No midas hadin, no justice, no revenge, no punishment from God could touch them. Can you imagine that? You want to know how to bring Mashiach? You want to know if you could demand Mashiach? You can only demand Mashiach if we unite together. And we finally give up the pettiness, the foolishness, the stupidity of having factions, of saying, I'm more, being pompous, I'm holier than you, I'm more religious than you, I'm better than you. No. You got to give that all up. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. You know what that means? It means, listen, O Jews, our God is one. Don't split him up. Don't say he's my God. No, he's not your God. He's mine. He's one. He's all of ours. You ever hear that interpretation? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Hashem is one. Hashem wants to stay one. United by the people. When Yaakov Avinu was about to die, he calls together his sons. And he says, Hey Asvu, gather together. Va'agid alachem achros hayamim, and I will tell you the end of days, our generation today. Says the Medrash, if you want to know how to get to achros hayamim, you want to know how to bring Mashiach, Hey Asvu, just gather together. Be one. The Yalkut Shimoni in Amos, Chapter 9, Yalkut Shimoni is Remez 599. He says that there was an elderly man, a very weak man, a very frail man, fragile man, who was ebbing away, who was about to die. And he calls together his sons. And he says to his sons, he says, look at this bundle of reeds. He was holding together a bundle of reeds. And he says to his sons, he says, I want one of you to go ahead and to try to go ahead and to break this bundle of reeds. And each son went ahead, took the bundle of reeds, and he whacked it, and it wouldn't break. And this feeble, frail, fragile, elderly man went ahead, and he said to his sons, he says, you couldn't do it? They look at him incredulously. Why? You could do it? He says, yeah, sure I could do it. He says, how could you do it? You're about to You're on your deathbed. You have no strength. He took the bundle of reeds, he unwrapped it, and he took out one reed, and he cracked it. Another, all 60 reeds eventually he broke. And he said, see, I just went ahead and I destroyed the bundle. I broke the bundle of reeds. And he said the lesson is that, like this bundle of reeds, when you're all united in a bundle, you're impervious to destruction. Nobody could have hit you. Nobody could hurt you. There's no sorrow. There's no pain. But when you go ahead and you think you're an individual, and you think you're on your own, then you're just one reed. Anybody could crack you. Anybody could break you. The Mishnah says in Avos, Hillel taught us, a person should always ohev es habrios. A person should love people, and bring them close to Torah. Ohev es habrios u'mekarvel Torah. Asks the Tiferes Yisrael, Rabbi Yisrael Lifshitz, famous commentator on the Mishnah. He says, 1 second, that's not how you call people brios. Brios means creatures, creations. The proper terminology would have been, the proper vernacular should have been, Ohev es Adam, love your fellow human being. He says, no. He says, Ohev es Brios. You know why it says that? Because not everybody you consider a human being. There are people that you think, he's not a person. He's not a mensch, Ohev es Brios. Love every creature, every person, somebody you don't even think is a person. And then that person will become close to you and close to God, close to Torah. You know that I saw recently a story about a woman who was called by her sister. Sister had a child, 12-year-old boy who was very defiant, very disrespectful, very rebellious. And the mother was despondent. Mother was giving up on the kid. She called up her sister who lived in another town. She said, I'm begging you to please take my son as a foster child. This woman herself had 6 kids. They weren't the easiest kids. No kids are easy, right? And she said, how am I... But sister said, listen, there's nobody else in the world. You're my only sister. What, I should give him to a stranger as a foster child? That would be such a chilul. It would be despicable. She says, you're right. Takes her as a foster child. This kid goes to the house like this, has a little ponytail. Terrible, terrible example for the rest of the family. And every day is a struggle. Every day is hard. The woman who became the foster mother, her husband taught in the local yeshiva, where this foster child was sent. And the principal tried his best to cope with the kid. One day he calls up the foster mother and he says, listen, ma'am. He says, I feel awkward talking to your husband because he's employed by me. He's a teacher in our school. So I'm talking to you. But I cannot tolerate this kid anymore. He is just too much for any of us to handle. He's going to be expelled. And you know what? The first thing the woman felt was like elated. Like, thank God, okay, this is an excuse for me to get out of this relationship because it's just tell my sister there's no school for him. But then something happened to her. Something happened to her. Maybe she realized this message of the only way to bring the redemption is for us to unite together and to feel each other's hearts and souls. And she went ahead and she said to the principal, that's very nice, but I want you to know that if you expel my son, then my husband is quitting his job. He will have to look for another teacher. The principal couldn't believe what he was listening to. What got over this lady? And he said, okay, we'll put him on probation. We'll try it a little longer. A little longer. The kid came home that day, and he says to his aunt, who was his foster mother, he looks at her right in the eye, and he says, is it true? She says, what true? Is it true? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. Is it true that you put my uncle's job on the line to save me? That you put your whole livelihood, the bread on your table, just for me? The principal had told the kid. And the lady said, yes. The kid was never the same. Oh, hey, Vesabrios! The person may not look like a person because, you know what? Maybe the person was subjected to things. But if you treat every human being like they're a human being, like a Tzelem Elokim, like God's image, you will bring them closer to God. Because you know what? What happened? The foster mother later related this. She said, you know what came over me? I realized if it was my own son, I would tell the principal that if it was my biological son, I would say, if you expel my son, my husband's leaving too. But you know what? I have to feel like my nephew is my son. I have to feel like all of Hashem's children are my children too. And that's how I had the strength to do that. We've had such terrible tragedies recently. The past month, we had a tragedy that was beyond words, that defies description. Locally here, there was another Jew that did it. He was mentally deranged, obviously. He wasn't well, an ill person. But nevertheless, it was a Jew. In Israel, a great rabbi, Makubal, was killed. Not by a terrorist. The first time I heard, I thought it was a terrorist. By another Jew. What's going on? I think I know what's going on. What's going on is Hashem is teaching us, Hashem is showing us a lesson that we are our own mortal worst enemies. It's not Iran, it's not Syria, it's not Saudi Arabia. We are culpable. We are the ones responsible. If we'd only fix our ship, if we'd only get together as brothers and sisters and take away the divisiveness, take away the pompousness, take away the fact that we are different, no, we are the same, then Be'ezer Hashem, we will bring the Geula Shalema B'mheira B'yameinu. Amen. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.